So here's a spreadsheet I have set up, and the idea is to compare the difference between running a regression using the S&P 500 or the broader market index and the difference between running a regression using returns versus risk premia. So we have two different things that we're going to try to look at here. So here I have 60 months worth of returns for FCAGX. This is a mutual fund that I chose, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. And so here I have returns from 2015 July through 2020 June, so that's 60 months worth of returns, and I have returns for the market, and I have returns for the S&P 500, and then I have the risk-free rate. This data came from the Ken French website, and this data came from the Yahoo Finance page. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to calculate the risk premia for these, and so I want to take the return of the mutual fund minus the risk-free, and I want to lock in that column, so I'm going to hit F4 three times until I lock in just the F. Click Enter, Control C, and I'm going to do Control Alt V formula so as not to ruin the coloring there. So I keep my shading, and I'll click this, and now let me just double check, make sure I didn't mess this up. So for example, in this month, the mutual fund lost 7.08. When I subtract the risk-free, it's 7.2, 801, 8.13, 8.1, 8.41, 8.53. So that looks like it's good. Okay, so now I have my risk premium. The next thing I want to do is I want to run my regressions. And so here is a template set up to run my regressions. And I'm going to do it slightly differently than running the entire regression routine in Excel. What I'm going to use is I'm going to use a specific function which calculates just the intercept, just the slope, and then we'll calculate the R-squared. And so the very first thing I want to do is I want to use something called the intercept function. And let me think about this. So, sorry, the regression I'm going to run here is I'm going to run just the return, and I'm going to run it on the market. Okay, so this is the return in the market. This is the return in the S&P 500. This is the market and the risk premium, and this is the S&P 500 and the risk premium. And so the idea is to be able to compare these two to each other, these two to each other, and then this one with this one, so we can compare the return to the risk premium, and we can compare the market to the S&P 500. So first thing I need to do is type intercept, and my known y's are going to be, and I'm sorry, this is the market in R, so my known y's equals intercept is going to be the return, and my known x's are going to be the market, and I'm going to hit that and hit enter, and now it's computed the alpha. Now I don't get the t-statistic or the p-value with this, and that's not necessarily what we're interested in at this point. We just want to know if there's a difference. The next thing I need to do is the slope equals slope, slope function, and it's going to be the same thing. My y's are going to be, I'm going to be looking at the return of the mutual fund, and the return of the market. Enter, okay, and that's the beta I get. And for the R-squared, I just know that it's equal to the correlation, whoops, it's equal to the CORREL, correlation between the return and the market, and it's going to equal that squared. I'm going to hit that, and there's my correlation, 72.3. Okay, and so now what I've done is I have calculated the regression statistics for the actual returns and the market, and now I want to do it again with this and the S&P 500, and I don't know, maybe the easiest way to do this is do Control-C, Control-Alt-V formulas. Now these aren't going to be right. I'm going to have to move them around, but I know I want my left-hand side variable to be that, and my right-hand side variable to be that. Click Enter, and I'm just going to move these manually to cover what I want them to cover, and maybe a quicker way to do this, but this seems to work fairly well. Okay, so in this row, I have the three regression statistics for regressing the return of the market on the returns of the mutual fund and the returns of the S&P 500 on the returns of the mutual fund. The next thing I want to do is do it again for the risk premia. And so I'll do Control C, Control all the formulas, and I'm going to have to move a bunch of stuff now. This is going to have to be here for the market and here for the mutual fund risk premium. This one I'm going to have to do again, move those to the return of the market and the return of, sorry, the risk premium for the market and the risk premium for the mutual fund. And then one more time, there and there. And then finally, Control C, Control all the formulas again, so as not to lose coloring. And now I need to move this up one and this one up and to the right, because this is going to be the risk premium of the S&P 500. And then same thing here. And we're almost done. And we can do our comparison. And there. Okay, so we built our table, and here it is again, already built on the last tab. And so now we need to start comparing things. And what it is that we want to check, what we're doing this for, is to be able to compare the difference between using the market and the S&P 500 versus using the return versus the risk premium. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to compare the dark blue to the light blue. And here I can see that we do have a big difference in both the alpha and the beta and the R squared. In fact, when I move from using the S&P 500 to using a broader market index, I can see my alpha gets smaller, my beta gets smaller, and my R squared actually increases. So there is a big difference. And the way we would conclude, oh, and same thing down here, I can see that when I'm using risk premium, I also get a big difference between using the S&P 500 and the market. And so I would conclude that it is better to use the market than to use the S&P 500, because this MKT, this crisp valuated index, is a much broader measure. It's going to give me a much better indication of what's going on with the stocks, and it is different from the S&P 500. The next thing to check is what's the difference between using little r versus big R. And I can compare that here using the dark blue and dark green, and here using the light blue and the light green. And here I see that there isn't that big of a difference. The difference between using little r and big R isn't really that big a difference in these statistics, and the same is true when I'm looking at the S&P 500. So the difference between the returns and risk premium is small. The difference between the market and the S&P 500 is larger. So we should use MKT and not S&P 500, but lots and lots and lots of times people do use the S&P 500. All of those betas that we can look up on Yahoo Finance and Google Finance, they use the S&P 500 and not a broader index. So it's likely okay to use returns instead of risk premia because over the last 5 years, the risk-free has been very low and not varied much. But again, we shouldn't use the S&P 500. We really should use the market when we are computing these regression statistics.